What's up, guys? Matt with the Colorado Spirits Collective. Today we are here at Black Button Distilling, and we're in my hometown of Rochester, New York. It's obviously a little different for us, mainly focusing on Colorado, but we always make the trip back here for the holidays. So yeah, but we're joined by Jason Barrett, who is the founder and man of all things here at Black Button Distilling. So thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get into it and tell us more about you, like pre-distillery days, and kind of what led you to starting it and getting into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what really drove me into distilling was I had a boss who drove me to drink. But I was working as an accountant down in DC. Had a bunch of breweries as customers because I was big in the homebrew club down there, and been homebrewing for a while. And then when the first distillery opened outside of Washington, D.C., Catoctin Creek, they make a great rye whiskey. I was their traveling accountant and fell in love with what they were doing and realized everything that I was passionate about for making beer, I could translate into making whiskey. And at the end, you'd have whiskey. So accounting, you work a lot of overtime in the spring, but they really don't need you around a lot in the summer. So I started taking time off each summer and going around to distilleries in Chicago and Denver and Spokane, Washington, and basically just offering to work for free and taking some classes. And before you know it, it seemed like a perfectly reasonable thing to sell everything I owned, quit my Fortune 500 job, move in with my parents, and buy a still to make whiskey for a living. I was 24 years old at the time, so it really did seem like a reasonable idea.
What could go wrong?
I mean, I told my grandmother I would either be fairly successful or completely bankrupt by the time I turned 30, and luckily it was a little more of the former than the latter.
Yeah.
So,
and here we are.
Here we are 10 years later.
Yeah,
Almost 10 years later.
Yeah, cool. So one of the really cool things about the story behind the name of Black Button is that it's something that started with your grandpa, I believe.
Yeah, so it's kind of got a family take. So my family's been making buttons here in the Rochester region since 1922. My great-grandfather was a shop foreman. My grandfather started there as a salesman after he came back from Korea, and he retired as the sole owner. My mom then took over the business. There was one problem with passing it on to the fourth generation. We discovered early on in my youth that I'm colorblind. So the joke always was if I took over the family factory, we'd only be able to make black buttons. So now I do make black buttons, but of the liquid variety instead.
Yeah,
So yeah, also it fits really nice on the top of the barrel.
yeah, the circular logo and everything is a pretty good stamp on there. So.
Yeah. It was funny, we went to our first designer and he showed me all these really interesting concepts, including two needles that were fighting with swords, and I was like, dude, it's a black button, round, 4 holes,
Yeah.
don't overthink it.
I just can't draw, I need you to
Right, yeah.
figure it out.
Yep.
Yeah. And then another cool fact is you guys are the first grain-to-glass distillery since Prohibition.
Yeah, so Rochester had a pretty good group of distilleries prior to Prohibition. We've actually got bottles from a whole bunch of them up on the shelf. There were probably 30 or 40 that went under due to Prohibition. And then the New York state laws really didn't allow for distilling for many years. But in 2008, a gentleman in the Hudson Valley managed to get the state to adopt the farm distilling laws of Oregon. And so as a farm distiller, we have to grow the grains we use in our products, but it allows us the right to have a tasting room, to self-distribute, and to have a reasonable license. So he passed those laws in 2008, and we started in 2012. And it was one of the reasons why I wanted to move back.
Yeah.
It was $60,000 a year for a distilling license in Maryland at that time. It was $1,500 for a distilling license in New York. But they do make it up on the back end. They get $2 out of every bottle we sell.
There you go.
But you only have to pay that on the bottles you sell. So
Right,
at least
you're not paying somebody else's salary just to keep the distillery open.
Yeah.
So, cool. And then we kind of talked about it when we were getting shown around the distillery, but you guys started in a small little, we'll call it a shed.
Yeah.
And now you're here in
5,000
square feet, and you got some pretty decent expansion coming up. Talk
Yeah.
about it a little bit.
Yeah, so the site we're sitting at, 85 Railroad Street, Rochester, New York, is where we've made every drop these last 9 years. Still have the original still that I got started on, but in about a year and a half, in 2023, we're going to be moving about a mile down the road to 20,000 square feet, where we'll finally have a little bit of breathing room. We'll be able to double up on the number of fermenters, have some actual bottling tanks. It'll just make the flow a lot easier, as well as we'll finally have like a private classroom, a private party room, a real kitchen. So it's going to be a nice upgrade. And if you're in the Rochester area before or after, we hope you stop in. We'll show you around. We'll have some fun.
Cool. Yeah, and I'm glad that we were able to get here before you guys do expand, just so we can see like kind of the whole where it started, where it's going, and that kind of thing. So,
As I say, in 2 years you'll have to come back and see what we've done.
yeah, absolutely. And then just like the majority of craft distilleries, you started as a one-man team.
Yep.
You want to talk about like how you started it, and like now we're here, and obviously there's tons of people working in the back.
Yeah. So as you said, I started. I had 6. So the day we opened, we had 6 part-time employees to help run the tasting room, and fairly quickly we ended up with 1 full-time manager, accounting, jack of all trades person. So I would, make whiskey at night and sell to local liquor stores during the day and run the tasting room on the weekends. And I was crashing on a futon in my office. The amazing part to that, my now wife dated me through that entire process, which I was finding a little.
She's the one.
Yeah, I mean, when date night was macaroni and cheese and a movie on a laptop while I make vodka till 2 in the morning, that's commitment right there.
I was saying your $50 futon.
Yes, yeah. But her and I have known each other since high school, so I guess it worked out. But yeah, now we have 83 employees. We distribute in 14 states. We export to Japan, and we're making about 1,000 bottles a day. So it keeps us pretty busy.
Yeah, definitely.
So.
And then speaking of making 1,000 bottles a day, you have an accident that turned into one of the unique processes of what kind of sets you guys apart from everybody else. So
we actually make whiskey unlike anybody else in the country. And I guess you'll have to try it to tell us whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I learned to distill at Dry Fly Distilling in Spokane, Washington, where we practice double pass distillation. And I believe that the pot stills produce a superior product. And so the problem is when I was starting, I didn't know enough about ordering equipment, and so the still designer actually designed our still to be single pass. So the idea that you would take mash, put it directly into the finishing still, and have finished whiskey come out the other end. That wasn't how I wanted to do it. We wanted to do an initial distillation run, gather the raw alcohol, and then refine it in the finishing still. And so as we went to do that, the problem is we were getting too high of proof. You've got to bring whiskey off the still at under 160 proof to call it bourbon. And if we just went straight through, it was coming off at 165, 170. So it'd be light whiskey, and that's a little harder to sell. So we realized that if we manipulated the valves on our still, we could take a heads cut in the column, get a nice clean heads cut, move the valve so we were coming over straight pot distilling. We'd run that for about 2 hours, get heavy character, lots of corn oil whiskey. And then as soon as we start to taste tails or propanol, we will go back into the column, restack that whiskey, and then run for another 2.5 hours of about 155 light character 4-plate whiskey. Those two marry right in the tank, get proof down to barreling strength, and go right in the barrel. But I think it's one of the reasons why our whiskey has as little bite as it does for a 3.5-year-old whiskey, but still has so much flavor in the middle of that palate. So we're really, we're gathering all of the best stuff in the middle of the run, but still taking very clean, tight cuts at both our heads and our tails cut.
Yeah.
So it's pretty unique to us. You'd have to have the same equipment set up, and then you'd have to be crazy like we are.
There you go. Yeah, and I've talked about it with some of my buddies that run like podcasts and that kind of thing. To me, this tastes like cookie dough, and it's like one of the most incredible things like ever. And it's very different and unique, and I'm sure that plays from like like you're saying, like your mirroring, putting together the two different ones, and then.
And some of it also might be the mash bill. I mean, it's 60% corn, 20% wheat, 9% rye, and 11% malted barley. So that's a pretty big wheat component. You don't find, there aren't a ton of 4-grain ones out of there. You know, out of Kentucky, you tend to find either rye-heavy bourbons or wheat-heavy bourbons. So this has a bit of both. And yeah, I mean, it's got that bready, you know, just a lot of flavors going on in there, which is what I was shooting for when we were making this.
Yeah, it's like a good, complex, like, taste.
Yeah.
It's not like over, like, you can't figure it out, but it's like more than just your regular shelf bourbon.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, there's a couple of things going on there. You get a different taste at the beginning versus the end. You know, it's sort of a whole song and dance as you move through the whiskey.
yeah, for sure. And then the other part is the different chambers that you guys do with your gin.
Yeah, so like most people, having not recently won the lottery or been bequeathed a large amount of money by a uncle I never knew, you know, it took all the money I had to buy the equipment and start the company, but we wanted to make our own whiskey from the beginning. We sort of missed the whole sourcing bit. I don't know if we just weren't smart enough to, but it wasn't why I started the company. I started it because I wanted to take great New York ingredients and make great New York whiskey. And so it became pretty clear if we were going to survive the first 3 years to the bourbon coming out, we needed to have some white goods. And we ended up getting pretty good at gin. So one of the things that we do that's a little different than gin than most places, rather than just dumping all the botanicals into one big column and sort of letting it air, you know, see where it goes, we actually have 4 like mini baskets inside our gin column. And if we put the juniper in the top basket or the bottom basket, we can really drive different flavors. And we have a whole spec sheet on how we pack that column so that we get exactly the flavor profile that we want for each of our gins. So our citrus forward gin definitely has made the biggest splash. I think some of it is just that bright orange label really pops on the shelf, but also it's a very non-piney, there's just not a ton of juniper in it. So yeah, we make 8 or 10 different gins, but this is by far the best selling. And you know, every bottle of gin we sell helps pay for making another bottle of whiskey.
There you go. And then you've kind of hinted on it throughout our discussion so far. You source all of your ingredients from local farms, and it's true New York, like bourbon from grain to when it hits your glass.
Yep. So yeah, so I would say it's about 95%. We haven't figured out how to grow oranges yet here in New York, although I have tried. So the grain is 100% New York. The corn, wheat, rye, and malting barley is grown down at Edgewood Farms in Groveland, New York, just south of Geneseo. The malting barley is then taken to Mermation Malt in Bloomfield, where it's basically floor malted and then brought up to us. Everything else we get direct from our farm. The cream comes from Owaka Milk, which is a part of upstate Niagara. And then the wheat for the gin is all from that same farm. The botanicals then, we get them all from Stewart Spices, which is right here in Rochester. But again, some of the dried orange peel, the dried lemon peel, they do have to source from outside of New York. But we're continuously moving things more this direction. Over the last 3 years, I've planted 5,000 juniper bushes on my farm down in the Bristol Hills. And so in a couple of years, we're going to be able to have juniper from my farm. And then we're also making barrels from oak trees right on my farm. So it turns out making the actual barrels takes several years longer than one would think it should. But we did our first harvest of white oak trees about 3 years ago. They've been quarter sawn, planed, cut into staves. They've now got to age outside for 2 years, at which point they'll be raised into barrels, at which point we'll add bourbon. You got to wait another 4 years. So it's definitely a patience game.
Oh, yeah.
I figured my kid will be in middle school before this really finishes, but we're getting there. We're making progress each
I
year.
mean, either way, you're gonna save some money that you can put towards a college fund. So
These are definitely going to be way more expensive than having just bought them. I now understand why there is no stave industry in upstate New York. But we're going to make about 50 barrels, and we're also actually working with a local college to harvest a local yeast that would be alcohol tolerant enough. So the hope when we go to run those 50 barrels, it'll be 100% New York grain, 100% New York water, 100% New York yeast, 100% New York wood, and we may even try to have the glass blown right in New York as well. So that's I don't know if we'll be able to do that with everything, but that's sort of the senior thesis project that I keep working on.
And with the I'm totally blanking on the name, where they make barrels.
Cooperage.
Cooperage. There.
Yeah.
I think there's only a handful, like
There's only
5 or
two.
6
There's only 2 in New York. Yeah.
2 in New York, but like across the U.S., I think there's like maybe less than 10.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Also a super small. I mean, almost everybody's buying from Independent Stave. So we get half of ours from Adirondack Cooperage in Remsen, New York, and that's where we'll end up making the 100% New York barrels. And then Barrel Mill in Minnesota is where we get the other half of ours. So it's a nice mix. They, Minnesota wood is a little tighter grain, has a little more character in the sugars department. The Adirondack oak is mostly from Missouri. It's a little wider cut on the staves, but it's got a they do all air drying, so you get a lot more fresh oak, fresh wood, walnut. I mean, there's just a lot of flavors that come from those barrels, and we find that about a 45-55 mix between the two gives us exactly what we want.
Okay. All right, so let's go through this lineup real quick, and we'll start with the 4-grain straight bourbon whiskey, which is my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely what I started the company to make. It's my it's how I like to drink whiskey. 60 corn, 20 wheat, 9 rye, 11 barley. Average age is going to be right around 3.5 years in 30-gallon white oak barrels. The oldest that's going to be in there is about 5 years. We pick every barrel, try to pick every barrel at the peak of its taste profile. So we're tasting every barrel multiple times, moving it around in the warehouse, making adjustments, and then really solidifying on when we think it is at its best. A typical batch will run probably about 40 to 60 barrels in a blend, but then we have somewhat of a Solera system where we only are pulling out about half from the barrel tanks each time. So half of batch 10 is in batch 11, half of batch 11 is in batch 12. It just gives us some nice consistency in flavor, because we feel like we've really got to have a brand promise of a certain quality level to folks, and we're always harvesting barrels. But if we go through a streak where we aren't finding barrels that meet our quality standards, we won't put it out. I've got a real high bar for these guys. If it's not as good or better than the last batch, we're not putting it on the shelf. And so that then sort of led into our happy accident. There's been a number of those, I guess, but our bourbon cream was supposed to just be a holiday special. We figured we'd make it each Christmas and kind of go from there. The first batch sold out in 3 weeks, so we made another one and another one and another one, and at this point we bring in the cream 5,000 gallons at a time, mix it with our bourbon, and get it all bottled up, and that's our best seller outside of New York. Beats the pants off of Bailey's, and as we were talking earlier, we haven't won as many awards as Buffalo Trace, but we've beaten them at every competition we've both shown up to, so that's something. Then the next one is Empire Rye. So the Empire Rye Whiskey Association is a group that was started to bring back rye whiskey to New York the way it would have been made prior to Prohibition. So there's kind of extra stringent rules on how much of the rye has to be grown in New York, what proofs it can come off the still at, what proof it can go into a barrel at, must be aged a minimum of 2 years. And so this is our expression, which is 94% rye, 6% malted barley, if you're gonna drink rye whiskey, drink rye whiskey.
There you go.
Yeah, I want it to be big, bold, punchy in the mouth with that rye grain, and that Danko rye really just comes through in such a nice way. So that's one of our limited releases, comes out twice a year. Then next we actually have our, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, when do they get released throughout the year?
So the first two are available year round. We do the rye in April and October, and then the apple brandy finish here is one of our newest ones. It just literally came out like 2 weeks ago. So this was 4 years in a bourbon barrel, and then 2 years in a fresh apple brandy barrel, and it is single barrel strength. We literally just pour it through cheesecloth to make sure there aren't any floating bits of barrel in there. We have a port finish one that's a cousin of that. Those each come out in November of each year. We only make about 300 bottles a year total of each of those. So
is that only a distillery release, or?
No, it's available here in New York as well, and you can actually buy it through our website.
Gotcha.
So we only do the gin, the bourbon cream, and the bourbon outside of New York. They are our 3 best sellers.
Yeah.
It would be hard to walk a distributor through, all right, you get 17 bottles for the state of Texas. They just aren't interested.
Right.
So.
And
Yeah, and then the last one's our citrus forward gin, light on the juniper, quite a bit of orange peel. Any gin cocktail that has a fruit component, it just is a very different take on gin and tends to be very well received by gin drinkers and non-gin drinkers alike. We kind of call it a gateway gin.
Yeah. Are you a gin drinker?
I am now. So, and actually this came about, so it's the year I get out of college, whole bunch of people getting married, you go to those weddings, you order a gin and tonic, and it's awful.
Yeah.
And the only thing they got at the bar is all those little lemons and lime slices. So I'd grab like a fistful of those, like crush them up in the bottom of my gin and tonic just to try to like make it palatable. So that's where I got started with gin, but it made me interested in a citrus forward gin.
Yeah,
So.
I'm right there with you, like I've never been a gin guy, and then since I've been going to different distilleries, like I'm obviously always willing to try it, but there's been still very few that I actually like. So, but
Well, we'll have to see if this one measures up.
yeah. And then you kind of hinted on it. The bourbon cream has won some awards.
Yeah, we've won a number across the last 10 years, whether it's at the American Craft Spirits Association or the American Distilling Institute. We won a Slow Food Award down in New York City a few years back, which only goes to one distillery per year that has the right sustainable practices. So that one really meant a lot to us. We won a couple over in France. I mean, it's always an interesting question. We only apply to maybe a half a dozen a year because it's very expensive. You got to send several bottles, you got to pay several $100s, and we just don't have a large marketing budget. So yeah, we only enter probably half a dozen, but we tend to come home with medals.
Yeah.
We've been very fortunate that the products have been really well received, both by the public and by those judges. So I always figure if the packaging can draw people in to try it the first time, the juice in the bottle's got to be good enough to get them to keep coming back.
Yeah, it's kind of like the one you talked about out of New York City, like that's kind of what you guys are all about. So obviously that would be probably one of your most prestigious awards for you.
Yeah, well, and especially when, we're up on stage with some really nice restaurants, like some that I can't even afford to eat in. But, it's just really cool to see people going back to the roots of how stuff was made and really making sure to not, quality over quantity. Some of the big distilleries in Kentucky can crank out in 17 minutes what my guys will spend the entire year making. But we get to have that much more control over every step of the process. So if you've got great ingredients, great fermentation, great distillation, great barrels, everything's getting quality checked. As at each step, as the barrels come in, they get looked over by our guys, and they don't all, there are some that we don't put whiskey in.
Right.
And we have specs with our barrel cooperages, and they even check what we get before it comes to us, because we'll ship it back. If it's not going to make the cut, we're not going to put it out. And that commitment to quality, probably always means we'll be on the small side, but I'd rather have 1,000 great bottles a day than 100,000 mediocre bottles a day.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. And then you have some teasers that anything coming out in the next year or so?
So I'll probably refer back to the fact that this one just came out, the apple brandy finish. We've got some neat stuff in the warehouse, bourbon finishing in rum casks, bourbon finished in tequila casks. We're actually going to finish some bourbon in ex-rye casks, but I don't have a timeline for any of those because they're not done yet. But we've sort of been, with all the chaos of the last year, we've not been doing quite as much R&D. We've been just trying to keep up with what we've got. So. Yeah, and then the move to the new space in 2023, that's probably our other just big focus item at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. Which you probably have to move some stuff around and slow some, like you said, the special release stuff down before you can be able to
we basically have to have 6 months worth of product in the warehouse before we turn off the stills.
Yeah.
Although it should only take 4 months to move them.
Yeah.
What if it takes 5 or 6? You just once we cut open those steam lines, we're down till we're set up in the new place. So that's a little scary.
Yeah.
So we'll take all of 22 to get ahead, so we can be shut down for 23. The irony is we'll be shut down, but we'll be working harder than ever because we have to literally disassemble the entire plant, move it to the new place, build an entire new facility. And then go back up and running. So that's going to be a little chaotic.
Yeah. And then you mentioned it, that you can get it from the website. For distribution-wise, how many states are you in, and where can you get that from?
Yeah, so we're in 14 states. We do have a where to buy page on our website. Our distributors throughout most of the country are either O-Pee-Chee or RNDC or Martinetti in Massachusetts, and then in New York we self-distribute. But if you can always ask for it at your local liquor store. They should be able to order it right from their distributor. But if not, you can usually order it right from our website. We work with a great back of house fulfillment center, and they're shipping to 38 of the 50 states right now. And you can just order it right off the website to your home.
Cool.
And some of the special releases you'd only be able to get off the website because, as I mentioned, we only widely distribute the gin, the bourbon cream, and the bourbon.
And then where can people follow you? Social media, website?
Yeah, so the website's blackbuttondistilling.com. Facebook, we're Black Button Distilling as well. And then we're on Instagram, blackbutton85. So we used to have a Twitter, but everybody got mean, and we just decided it wasn't worth it anymore.
I feel like Twitter's kind of gone out the door.
Well, and people seem to get angry at you if you don't reply to them fast enough, and
tweet me back.
Pretty much, if you don't answer them in half an hour, and I got a whole company I got to run. I can't just hang out on Twitter. So we gave that up a while ago. But yeah, I mean, our easiest one is our website, blackbuttondistilling.com. It has links to all the rest of it, and we got a little email list where we keep people up to date on what we're doing and where we're going. So,
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you follow Colorado Spirits Collective, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and stay tuned. We have some big announcements coming on with our festival in June. So yeah, cheers.